The test on Friday. So, any questions on it?
Oh yeah.
They don't make dinosaurs like they used to.
Apparently.
Yes.
So for outline, do you want us to write out the?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to just put a couple words. Show them. You don't have to write down a whole sentence. Just a couple words showing which document, what you can use for historical content and purpose.
Okay.
And yes.
For the test, for the cycles, you want us to write, like for our short ideas, we couldn't do like us drawing the cycle or a paragraph about it.
Just like one or two sentences, very briefly explaining it, and then the most basic part. You don't need every detail I put in, just full production. And then there's just a couple of short notes. I'll tell you what you need. And don't forget, your documents related to specific facts. You need 2 to 3 facts per paragraph and relate the documents to facts. So you're talking about them and then using the documents to reinforce a fact that you know. And you'll notice that there are 7 documents. Every one, well, the cartoons are good examples of just imperialism, social Darwinism you're leaving. You're going the wrong way. There's just a wall there. So, but you notice the first document, that is Alaska. I just stuck that out there. I'm spreading over the continental, outside the continental United States. The second one, is that Josiah Strong? Second one? Or is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's social Darwinism, the definition of social Darwinism. The third document, what's that? Is that Albert Thayer Mahan? We got 2 political cartoons. We have Open Doors. And then 1904, Roosevelt. Geez, I wonder if he made an addition to some little document, some little foreign policy statement in that year. So I relate everyone to something specific, and it should, yes, you have to write an essay, it has to be your material, but you have to be practical to make sure you can use the documents, but these documents are a pretty good overview of all of imperialism, yeah.
So for the test, are we the specifics of the Monroe Doctrine to like relate it back to
on the test?
Yeah.
On the test, just no foreign, or the Monroe Doctrine was no European intervention.
Yeah.
And the Roosevelt Corollary is a U.S. can intervene. That's all you need. And then that relates to the Dominican Republic. And those, I think, are separate on that. And you have to know some of the elements of the populace, some of the elements of the progressive, which we're going to do in a second, some of the reasons for imperialism, all pretty basic. Do you have any questions on the 82? You have to use 6, at least 6 documents related to facts, at least 3 per half. Make sure you have a good thesis statement. This can be pen or pencil for your outline because it's supposed to be like a prep, so I'm not going to, this one I will allow pen or pencil. But for the test, the short IDs have to be in pen. No, got it. Pencil. You good? There's no questions? And tomorrow the extra credit, what we do if you do the extra credit? Oh, I didn't know. I'm writing on the board today. I decided not to do. My board is getting worse and worse and worse. So with that, huh? Rehab, yeah, you gotta go to rehab. And it takes a long time. Ankle, anyone ever tore out the ligaments and broke their ankle? No one's done that? I wouldn't recommend it. It's not as glamorous as you think. Lots of rehab. Blow out your knee, do lots of rehab. Well, no more injuries? Do you know that one? Yeah, you dislocate your shoulder? Lots of rehab. Injuries are fun.
I'm trying to maintain it, but it just makes it.
At least 3 perhaps. At least 3.
You know, my mom.
And that's what's required for the AP exam, so if you can get 4, that'd be great, but at least 3. Same thing for documents, you need 6. But if you need 7, it's not, you know. But the thing about it is, if there's 7 documents and 1 doesn't work for you, it's a lot. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about, where do we finish here? Do we finish the Great White Fleet? So the Great White, oh, what was the yellow peril? Yeah, it's your what? Yeah, splitting. That's spleen. Yeah, the Japanese Empire. Spleens are great. Hey, don't mess with the spleen. I recorded that line. Spleens are important. Spleen. Filters your blood. Hit the ground first try. By the way, there's ants in here. And there's ants in Mr. Foucault's room. There's ants all through the basement.
It's the feral thing.
They're just trying to learn everything too.
Yeah.
No.
So, who did Japan defeat in that war that kind of shocked everybody? And what was the treaty? And yeah, Treaty of Portsmouth. Who won the first Nobel Peace Prize? And what was the rebellion in China? The Boxer Rebellion. Yeah. And against foreign influence, what was the? Is it an ant? Coming for you. Mr. Mars's room, he's just all covered. So with that, and everyone is, it's like a tuberculosis war. I'm sick, everyone is sick. Consumption going all over. And who's sick in here now? Yeah, everyone, so all the rest of you will be sick. We work in a petri dish. All right, back to this. How many ants are there in Mr. Mahanda's room? 1,000. What was the policy that everybody would equally exploit China? Yeah, that's open door. And the United States would engineer a revolt in what country to get the Panama Canal? What's that? Colombia. I heard. And Walter Reed, Dr. Gorgas, Dr. Reed, they discovered at least how to control what disease? Yeah, mosquitoes for what diseases? Yellow fever, malaria. So let's go ahead and get to. So the Great White Fleet. The last thing we wrote the Great White Fleet. I'm not going to show you the picture of that. This was Roosevelt, 1907, and in fact, they would not get back to the United States to the end of 1909. This is where they sent a portion of the U.S. fleet on a goodwill mission around the world. So it was a goodwill mission around the world. Basically, what it was, okay, this was not uncommon, but partially was now the United States has arrived on the world scene. The U.S. is now a world power. We have one of the stronger fleets in the world. Modern ships, painted white because that was peaceful. Not very good. Camouflage. By then they're already painting all the ships gray. But the other reason, this is the biggie we have to get down. The Great White Fleet was going to intimidate Japan. Intimidate Japan. Look at us. The so-called yellow peril. And so with that, it's tied in to imperialism. It really is tied in. But the United States being the imperialism, just at the end, with populism, that kind of gone away. And new heading, the Progressives. And the Progressives, the first thing we have to get about the Progressives is this. They have many of the populist ideas. They took some of the ideas. They were not populist, but they believed in a progressive income tax. They believed in inheritance tax, better working conditions, labor unions. If you go back to that 1892 populist or Omaha convention, the populists took many of those ideas. But I repeat, they were not populist, but they took some of the ideas. And a progressive today, someone who calls himself progressive, has some of these elements, not all of them, like everything else, things change. And just like today, there's a lot of different elements of progressive. You can't just simply say you're a progressive and you believe these 5 things. You can't paint it with one brush. It's a very broad group. And to give you an idea, they are bipartisan. Anybody know what bipartisan means? Both parties. There are Republican progressives and Democratic progressives. Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican, and yet he was a progressive. Woodrow Wilson was a progressive, and he was a Democrat. In fact, there would be a progressive party. Most of the time, it was like all third parties were pretty small, but Teddy Roosevelt got a lot of votes in 1912 as a progressive. And so did Robert La Follette in 1924. So it is both parties, and so it's really hard to define a true progressive. And so did Robert La Follette in 1924. So it is both parties, and so it's really hard to define a true progressive. But there are certain principles we can get, even though they'll disagree on these ideas. Number one, the first basic characteristic of a progressive. These are middle class reformers. Middle class. Middle class reformers. Now don't forget, middle class does not mean the median, and I'm going to say this again, I'm going to keep saying it, because I just read the newspaper yesterday. Read the paper that talking about middle class, and it was talking about the median income. The median, like the middle income. And that's not middle class. It's about $62,000 a year in the United States. It's the median. No, middle class is much more hard to define. And what it means is people who can afford an upper class lifestyle, some of the elements of an upper class lifestyle, some of the trappings of an upper class lifestyle, but still have to work. They have to work. That is middle class, but they can afford some of those trappings. So it's relatively small, and their income would be higher than that. Now you might say, wait a minute, can't somebody at the median afford some of those trappings? Like, think about today, a house, a car, that kind of thing. Well, yeah, but they have to go in, most people have to go into a significant amount of debt to do that. And so that kind of takes you more into working class. And most people are working class. You buy a home, what's the average length of a mortgage, which is a home loan? You know? 30 years. That's a lot of debt. That doesn't mean it's bad. But that's not the same thing as saying I'm going to go put down money to buy a house. And so, with that, that's middle class reformers, which is over here. Middle class reformers. And here's the thing about it is, they like the system. And that's really important to understand. These aren't the populists who want to change the system. These are people who like the system. So they want to reform it to save the system. The system is benefiting them. They are the new professional class. So these are managers. These are high-level accountants. These are doctors and lawyers, and at the lower end of that would be teachers, all those kind of things. These are these kind of people then. These are people who they like the system. They want to save them. And so it's important to understand they feel part of or like capitalism. And they like, that's supposed to be a K. Just imagine that's a K. And they like this democratic republic we have here. But they want to reform it. So they'd be like, we like the system, like the accumulation of capital, the innovation that creates, but we're worried that too much money is focusing on top. Or we like this democratic republic, we like our our so-called democracy, yet significant numbers of people aren't involved in it. And we have to reform that. So they think the system is good, and they feel part of it. They feel part of it. We just got to reform it. And so with that, once we get that basic idea down, these are top-down. This is a top-down reform. Populism is bottom-up. This is a we know what's best for you idea. So even if they took some of the ideas of the populists, it is still, we know what's best. We know the best way for you to function. And so that's what it means. And number two, I have to get the right order. How do we achieve this? What is the best system? We need regulation. Not government ownership of big business, but regulation of business. Regulation of capitalism. You have to regulate capitalism. If not, the whole system would fall apart. They also want to regulate and change the political system. But to their point of view, if we don't regulate capitalism, eventually those on the bottom will rebel, or those on top will create a dictatorship. And we'll be left out. We have to regulate. And here's the thing then. We need rules. New rules for government, but also new, especially voting, but also new rules for worker safety, product safety, quality, or the biggie, monopolies, to control monopolies. We need rules. And they would decide who are the only people who can make these rules, the only group, the only entity. It's got to be government. It's got to be government. They would try the local, state, but then only the federal government really can do it because of interstate commerce. Only government. Government has the power. Government can represent the people. And if we could change the rules of government a little bit, we could get a better government, they were hoping. But only government can do this. That means, what is the philosophy that says no government interference in competition? No, they did not believe in laissez-faire. They believe government has a major role. I got to be clear about it. The new conservative economics, they just want laissez-faire in competition. They want a government aid for them and to break up labor unions. But no laissez-faire. We believe in rules. But let's get to the biggest one. The thing that will save us. We have to get rid of or be anti-monopoly. What's the word that's synonymous with monopoly? Antitrust. Which is too bad that's synonymous because the word trust doesn't make any sense anymore, but it's still the law, the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's still the law. So, anti-monopoly. So they got to break up monopolies. Break them up. That is the most important thing. Break up monopolies or oligopolies. And after the talk was come up with a formula. They control so much of the market, they must sell off parts or break it up into separate companies. Period. Never let them get too big. Because capitalism does have a tendency to eat itself. It creates monopolies. What do monopolies do? They get rid of competition and therefore get rid of capitalism. It just has that tendency. Unless you make the rules that it can't do that. So what they want is, that's an arrow, competition. If you have competition, you won't have as many of these problems. Competition. Competition in the marketplace. Because what does competition do? Just the most basic element. What happens to prices of goods if you have competition between companies? Prices go down because companies are competing. So you don't have these monopolies raising prices of things we need. Like insulin. There's one for today. You know what I mean by that, don't you? You know the prices of insulin? Yeah, it's gone up about 400% in the last 2 years. Monopolies. Which is kind of a big deal for some people. What happens to wages if you have competition for workers? Wages go up. What happens to the quality of goods, or for that matter, service? They have to go up. If there's competition, you put out bad stuff, nobody will buy. And what happens to innovation? If you have competition, there's an incentive to innovate and come up with something new. I mean, the period of the greatest innovation was also the period of the biggest anti-monopoly activities, the 50s and the 60s. Certainly not today. One more big thing. Monopolies focus money, especially, but power in the hands of a few. You get rid of monopolies, and it spreads out political power. It'll be harder for one or two people to focus control the political process. Remember John D. Rockefeller? He spent $700,000 for McKinley. That just showed the absolute immense power of one person to dictate an election. Heck, we have today, right now, somebody trying to essentially buy the presidency. Michael Bloomberg has jumped in the Democratic primary in the last 2 months. He spent $400 million of his own money. And to him, it was worth just a little bit over 60 billion, I mean. That's literally the same of me losing a penny. Have the same effect on his life. And that's more than anybody else, more than the rest of their candidates got combined. So if you see Michael Bloomberg commercials, it's because he's buying everything up. Hey, he's going to the States and buying up all the political consultants. Basically walk in and say, quit your job and I'll pay you $6,500 a month. That's money. That's a lot of money. And I'm waiting for him to offer me, yes.
I'm sure that Jeff Bezos donated or is like starting a.
We'll talk about that then. Save that.
All right.
Save that idea about that. Because philanthropy. So with that, that's what they want. So you get rid of, so all these things come with monopoly or getting rid of monopolies. And so they want capitalism. I should add one more thing. There were, between 1899 and 1902, 4,500 companies turned into 200. Consolidations. The 200 just sucked up all their competitors. How many accountants does 200 companies need compared to 4,500? When companies merge, they get rid of a lot of their staff. They don't merge and hire more workers. They merge and lay people off. You need half as many accountants because you only have one business. You need half as many managers. Geez, I wonder who the managers are. Oh yeah, the same middle-class people who made up the bulk of the progressives. So there's an element of self-preservation, which is not necessarily bad, but it makes sense too. Getting to that, number 4. Why do this? Here is an important thing about the progressives. Yes, there's a top-down attitude, but there's still an acknowledgement that we live in a society here. We're not all individuals. We're little cogs in a machine. We are people that have to interact together, and what we do affects other people. And if some people in society are doing poorly, whatever your definition might be, and are impoverished or feel out of power, that could bring the entire society down. If you have huge inequalities, inequalities can bring the whole thing down. Can bring the whole thing down. So if you have, because we have to have rules where we come together and function together as society, or either you're going to get somebody trying to create a dictatorship and they'll wall themselves up, they'll wall the community, which are happening, or there'll be a revolution the other way. And that was their real fear. Remember, they want to save the system. And so, what they believed in is the concept of social justice. Social justice. And I'll come back to this idea, but social justice. And the thing about social justice was this idea that we must do everything we can to help the lives of all people in our society. So nobody, or as few as people as possible, are left behind. And that's this whole inequalities thing. The more people left behind, the weaker your society becomes and the whole thing can break down. That was the progressive idea. By the way, this goes against a lot of social Darwinistic thinking. That's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be some people on top and some people on the bottom. And in fact, I'm doing the people on the bottom a favor by seeing how good my life is. This, no, it'll break down. And so they talk a lot about this concept of general welfare. And that comes from the preamble of the Constitution, to provide for the general welfare. And there's a philosophy from Britain called Pragmatism. Some of you might have remember pragmatism. Remember Thomas Jefferson? He was pragmatic. And the idea of coming up with the best solution for the problem. Well, pragmatism takes it to the next step. If you're going to come up with policy for your country, the policy must provide, you've probably heard this before, the greatest good for the greatest, that's my number sign, the greatest good for the greatest good. We can't develop a policy to help everybody, but if enough people, lives get better, society gets stronger. The old rising tide raises all ships. That's pragmatism. Now, I think you probably already can see some problems with that. Somebody, by definition, will be left behind. And who decides that? And what exactly do we mean by helping the general welfare of society? Or for that matter, what is a monopoly? Who's going to do regulation? How do we save the system? And who are these middle class people? And those are actually real problems. And that's why we get to number 5. The Progressives had great faith in experts. Expert. Trained professionals. A new professional class. And this would be a massive progressive reform to set up professional requirements for occupations. And this would radically change colleges, change attitude towards who's in charge, this concept that we can get experts. And the big thing about experts is it would take out 2 big things, they thought. It would take out this desire to just make policy or government or actions based upon profit. It'll take profit out of it. Because you have experts, not somebody working for a robber baron trying to get rich, or the robber baron himself. We'll have an expert do it. They'll be incorruptible. And remember political machines? Who were the people who ran political machines? What were they called again? Yeah, take the bosses out too. Take them out of the equation by what kind of people? Experts will be empowered to try to get this away, especially the bosses. Get the political machines out so we just have experts running governments and making decisions. So then we have experts deciding all these really difficult questions. Trained professionals. A new professional class would come out of this. This would radically alter college, for example. A progressive level reform would also be at the same time as Europe. They're called progressives, but the same kind of thinking. Before, college diplomas, most people didn't get them, but you'd have basically a Bachelor of Science of Arts and Bachelor of Liberal Arts. Those were your degrees. Think about today, how many specializations are there? Of all the different sciences there are. There's like biology and stuff. Think of all the different ones in almost every different field. But getting back to this, we're talking about government here. There'd be a new Bachelor of Liberal Arts, which is a bachelor's degree that comes from medieval Europe, in the study of government. What is that called? What's that? Yeah, political science. And how about for how societies function? What's that? Sociology. How about for how countries accumulate money and wealth and deal with scarce resources? Economics. How about your mind? Psychology. biology, yes, or history and different areas of history. But the point is these specialized degrees that all of us, if we're thinking about going to college, I might go back, who knows? But you know these specializations. That was a progressive level reform. Before the progressive era, what made you a doctor? I'm a doctor. Yeah, that's my sword. Or saw. I'm really fast with a saw. I mean, there were medical schools, and you're worth training, but you don't have to say it. What made you a lawyer? I'm a lawyer. You could say you had a degree, but what do lawyers have to pass now? The bar exam was a progressive era reform. Progressive era. The first 20 years of the 20th century, the progressive era. What about doctors? What do doctors have to do? Yeah, now they have to go to school and to get an advanced degree, because they have to do residency and an internship. Yeah. So there's certain professional requirements. Do the same for teachers. I mean, so many other things. There's certain things that have to do which before weren't there. Whole idea is creating this professional class. In fact, they'll have a name for them in government. And this will come out at the end of the progressive era, but by the 1960s and 70s through today. Technocrats. These are trained professionals in government with the idea that you're like a Democrat or, in a democracy, but they're somehow above the political fray. And so they won't be corrupted by business or political gain. They'll be experts to decide our fate. And as we all know, if you have an advanced degree, you're completely incorruptible. You will never do anything for money. That's my way of saying, yeah, there's a couple flaws to this. It doesn't quite work the way they wanted. This is the idealized version. But these technocrats, so these experts to decide this, and these would be the kind of people who will vote. We just somehow take money and bosses. And what kind of people will be the experts? They'll get there by their own merit, AKA a meritocracy, where you go as far as your merit and abilities take you. Now, that was the idealized goal. Does it work? No, not really. There's some flaw. There's some major flaws in it. For example, if you, like today, if you have wealth, the odds are you'll probably have a much different attitude towards college than somebody who doesn't. Does that mean you're better or smarter? So there's some issues with this. But the point is, that was the plan. That was our idea. And we'll have these trained professionals do this. And there's something else. Wait a second here. It's just a different way of saying it. But you have some people with their merit are making all decisions. They're somehow smarter than us. Well, what is this? What is a philosophy? Isn't this another version of social Darwinism? A lot of the early progressives, and you still see people who call themselves progressive today, really have a top-down attitude. Social Darwinistic. Social Darwinistic. Some people are on top. Why? They're experts because they know more than you. So we should let them decide their own fate. This fits in with imperialism. We as the United States come in and tell other countries how to live. In fact, that one cartoon of the Filipino, do you want to talk about the DBQ? We have Uncle Sam holding a soldier and a school teacher. That's social Darwinism. Are we going to let us try to civilize you because you're so much inferior, or do we just have to shoot you? Wow, what is cartoon, huh? That's social Darwinism. There are some people on top and they just know better. So you get one of the weird twists of faith, where you have this group that talks about societies and social justice, and yet some of the racist people in the era were so-called progressives. Woodrow Wilson, in many ways, one of the most impactful of all the progressive presidents, was the most racist president in history. And we're talking the United States here. He had a lot of competition. And yet Wilson was. Why? Certain people are on top. And isn't that the greatest good for the greatest number? We have the same thing with relation between the sexes. The progressives are very, very complicated. And there are some people today who are progressives who have that attitude and call themselves progressives today. I don't think it's many. Franklin Roosevelt was the successor to the president's or the progressive movement, and he despised social Darwinism, despised it. And yet his cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, that was all right. It's all for it. So it's complex, is my point here. Heck, they were terrified, the progressives. Thought, you know what would destroy society? A lot of progressives thought? Race mixing. Society, we live in a society, if you have race mixing, society will break down. It was some progressives, and this came from the idea of, well, experts believed in the trash science of an American creation called eugenics. Eugenics is selective breeding of humans. Or a way to really look at it is to make sure that Northern and Western Europeans don't mate with anybody who's not Northern or Western European. Selective breeding. That was a United States idea, and a lot of progressives got into that because this concept of keep society going. I was looking for this. Greatest good for the greatest number. By the way, who loved eugenics? Our Nazi friends. And so it's a very interesting group. By the way, anybody attacking progressives will immediately say, we'll bring this up, the eugenics. Always. I should add one more thing. Since they're anti-monopoly, want regulation, what did those who wanted to keep the monopolies, what did they call progressives? Bomb-throwing anarchists, exactly. So, last big thing about this. Why? They wanted to reform capitalism then. The whole thing comes to reform capitalism. Why? Fear of revolution. That's all they talked about. That's all the progressives talked about. Revolution. But I told you, everyone talks about revolution. That was on everyone's mind. If we don't smooth out the rough edges of capitalism, we'll either get an authoritarian dictatorship, this is still pre the term fascism, or some kind of anarchist revolt. If we don't say that that's what we're going to get. So we've got to adopt some of the tools of, even some of the tools of the socialists or the populists to save capitalism. And how do we do this? Well, one big element of this they wanted. How do we do this? We need a bigger group of people who feel part of the system and want to save it. The progressives wanted more of what kind of people? Exactly. Increase the size of the middle class, you increase the size of the people who want to save the system, and you make society stronger. And there was an element of that. That was, without a doubt, the policy of Franklin Roosevelt. Expand the size of the middle class so you get more people feeling part of the system, feeling that we can all, more people enjoying some of these benefits, some of these trappings of, not quite upper class life, but, things like a vacation and a home and a car. And that is the world I grew up in. I was born in that world, which is ironic. I was born before FDR, but I just knew it. My family was very advanced. But no, that expectation is that's my world. We're gonna have middle class, more people, it's always this kind of, and that's not what it is today. So that's part of the reason why there's such a big difference between old people and young people today. I grew up with different expectations. So have a little sympathy for oldsters, right? Because they don't have sympathy for you. We're old. What do they say? Toughen up. My day. I just heard that from two people today. Two people talking about these kids today. Two of them today. I'm so happy. Usually I only get it one a day. How often do you hear it? Because you guys are tough enough. Work hard in my day. Who did I hear in my day? I've heard it twice today. I always feel so good about that. So, It makes me laugh. So, social gospel. Oh, no, not social gospel. Don't write that down. Who wrote it down? What were the reporters that started searching or started reporting some of the abuses of monopolies? What were those reporters called? Muck. Hey, I want you to acknowledge that R. That's a good R. The K, yeah. Inconsistent. Yeah. See?
I think the line is under this.
These are reporters. Okay, that's really good. But what they were doing is they're looking into the abuses of capital, not the abuses of monopolies. Not so much capitalism, it's complex. By the way, I should add, those who have monopolies would say, you're attacking capitalism. No, they're attacking monopolies. And the most famous was Ida Tarbell. What company did Rockefeller run? She looked into the abuses of Standard Oil and wrote an expose that really would change a lot. In fact, lead to the breakup of Standard Oil. The big thing is Standard Oil going into Kansas and destroying every little oil or pipeline business and corrupting the government. Just, of all places, Kansas. I don't know why of all places, but why not? Another very famous one was Jacob Riis. And Riis wrote about what's happening in the big cities, specifically New York. He wrote, and also he's a photographer, so pictures of how the other half lived. And he talked about this huge percentage of the population in New York City that was cramped into overpriced, overcrowded tenements without shower or without bathroom facilities, one sink per tenement. These were fire traps, absolute hellholes with no kinds of protection at all. People were paying rent to live in the alleys. People were paying rent to live in basements, just basically an area carved out for them without light or anything else. Most of the tenements in some of the areas of New York City, like in the Five Points area, didn't have any piping at all, so no sewage facilities at all. You just dump it out the window. And this is in 1900. And the point about Riis was these conditions were because, in essence, landlords having monopolies over very limited housing. And this fits in, how can people live like this? And so, with that, you're going to get the first group of reformers who try to do it outside of government. And they thought, well, government, we don't need it. We can just do it outside. And that is the social gospel movement. And the social gospel movement, mostly in the United States, this will be mostly Protestants, but there's a long tradition of social justice within the Catholic Church. Similar thing was happening in the Ottoman Empire, because there's a lot of the issues of social justice, the issues of a few rich having everything and the poor is a big part of the Old Testament, or the Torah, or the Quran. And it's actually really interesting. It all revolves back to debt. It's actually interesting how the Torah, the Quran, and the Old Testament have all this stuff about the problems of debt. Didn't we already talk about all the problems with debt? It's amazing how these things just keep cycling around, debt again. But a classic example of this would be basic charity, like the Salvation Army. Now, the charity is not like philanthropy. So, who mentioned Bezos? So, Bezos, it says he's going to give us philanthropy. He says he's going to. How much? 10, how much? 10 billion for?
For like the battle climate change.
Yeah, the battle climate change. Why? Because there's going to be a big, there was going to be a report come out on Frontline that's going to talk about it, and Bezos is trying to get ahead of this by saying, no, we're not bad, and we're not doing, look, we're going to give $10 billion. But that's philanthropy. And I would guess, he's watching. All of it will go for what's good and just. I would say 90% will probably funnel back into companies that are owned or operated by Amazon. It would shock me if they weren't, or his own foundation. But anyways, this is a more broad-based shift. So technically not run by one person who I'm rich, so I'll tell you what to do with my money. Another one would be the settlement house movement. Sorry about the little cough there. And these would provide housing. These would provide well, for the urban poor, the homeless, so many immigrants, especially young women who live lives of absolute terror. In these big cities, this would provide shelter, a place to stay, like a little dormitory, maybe education. And they had limited effect. One of the big issues were so many young women, what's one out of 4 was the estimate. Women had to turn to prostitution in New York at some time in this era because of absolute destitution. They had no money, no way to make any money, so they had to turn to whatever they could do. You know, they weren't immoral, they were, which a lot of people said they were, they just give you an idea how horrific it was, especially for women. And it was tough for men too. And so the settlement house really helped them. But the big thing about this was the charity might help. It might alleviate some of the rough edges, provide support, and therefore it's not bad. But what did it do to the root cause? The root cause remained. Actually, got stronger. It helped the system that made them poor. And that's the problem with charity. I should add, is it ever enough? No. And rich people don't give a lot for charity. You know, poor people give more. Poor people just don't have any money. Exactly. And so you don't need to give charity to rich people.
I'm gonna do it one of these days.
Yeah, you don't have the guts, do you?
No, I feel like you get mad if I go.
Oh, I'd get mad.
See?
But like I said, you gotta have a little courage.
Yeah. Yeah.